everybody. My name is Sharon Loudon, and I'm the Artistic Director of Chautauqua Visual Arts. And we are here today, the whole team of Chautauqua Visual Arts and Chautauqua Institution, to welcome you to the Chautauqua Visual Arts Lecture Series. And today we have a fantastic person coming to talk with us. We have Abby Chen, who is the head of contemporary art at the Asian Art Museum in San Francisco. Before she took over that position in 2019, she was the artistic director at the Chinese Culture Foundation, also in San Francisco, where she was able to transform the organization into an open and process-driven platform for contemporary art practice. So Abby has organized a lot of exhibitions, too many to actually include here, but some of them have included a lot of social-based experiments and with many artists. And actually, we were just talking about a really fantastic artist who I'm really a big fan of, Christine Wong Yap, who's really wonderful, who we will be bringing to Chautauqua this summer in professional development for our current and hopefully alumni participants of our School of Art. I should also share with you that the reason why Abby's here with us today is she was introduced to me by one of our mentors, our luminous lead faculty members, Alpesh Kantalal Patel, who is extremely generous. And he and Abby have worked together on many things. And Abby has actually contributed an essay about her life and work in a book that Alpesh and Yasmin have edited. It's called Storytellers, Living and Sustaining a Creative Life. And that is coming out, I believe, either end of this year or early next year. So if you can't get enough of Abby here, you can read about her life in Alpesh and Yasmin's new book that's coming out. So also I should just say before we bring Abby on, I'm thrilled to announce that Chautauqua Visual Arts and the Asia Art Museum are partnering together to be able to bring some of the artists that Abby is working with from Asia and brings over from Asia to Chautauqua to be able to hear from them, see them work, and to partner to benefit at the benefit of many artists that she works with and also the artists that come to Chautauqua. So I'm super thrilled about that. There's a bright future ahead, and we're working on that to contribute to Chautauqua Institution and everyone who visits. So without further ado, I'm so excited to see Abby here. And Abby, come on in. I would love for you to come in. And I'll just say too that, Abby, hi. It's great
Hi,
to
everyone.
see you.
Hi, Sharon.
Thank you very much for being here. We're super thrilled. I'm excited to see you on the back end to be able to have a Q&A with our audience. And everybody, I'll just share with you, you can either do that by chat or come with us on the screen, and we'll be able to have a nice conversation after. But I'm excited to learn from you, Abby. Thank you very much.
Oh, thank you, Sharon. And I'm excited to be here. And I want to thank you and the Chautauqua Institute for having me. And every time we're talking in front of a new group, I got the opportunity to share our work with new audiences. And I'm just looking at the chat and people coming from Seattle and also Palo Alto. So definitely hoping Bruce and Ali will come to Asian Art Museum now that we just reopened, and welcome everybody who come to San Francisco, even though this is not a great time to travel. But when you can, we would love to have you visiting our museum because we're doing some wonderful things. So with that, I think that we will start our today's presentation. And again, my name is Abby Chen. I'm the head of Contemporary Art Department at the Asian Art Museum. And this is a new department that was founded in 2019 when I joined. And I'm very, very excited about this opportunity because I think that we have built a tremendous platform for artists, which I will introduce in a later time. And with that, let me just show you what our museum look like now after the groundbreaking transformation. So I'll go to the next slide. So what you see is a architectural rendition at the time when we're envisioning the expansion of the museum. The Asian Art Museum was founded more than 50 years ago. And in 2003, we moved to the Civic Center just across from the City Hall. And in 2017, we embarked on this transformation project, and it was completed in 2019. And that's also the time that I joined. And so what you're seeing this rendition is at the time we're envisioning what this building will look like in the Civic Center district, as well as the Tenderloin district, where it's an extreme diverse community where a lot of Southeast Asian immigrants live. And also there's a very big homeless population and community live there as well. So we know it's important to think about the museum's position in this neighborhood. And our director, Jay Xu, had this vision to turn the museum inside out. So how are we going to bring what is inside of the museum to the street, and also to connect the museum with the public life? And I'll talk more about that with the project that we did. And in 2019, our goal was to have this grand opening for this completion of the historical project, which is the Akiko Yamasaki and Jerry Yang Pavilion, and with the east-west terrace, that is the rooftop. And then COVID hits. But what we were doing at the time, we were not thinking there's going to be a pandemic, but then they're even more timely as now that we're looking back. So the first one that went up to the Wilbur Gallery, which is behind this glass wall and is on the second floor from the street, is Chanel Miller's work, I Was, I Am, I Will Be. And this went up on view in 2020. And I was very adamant about talking about her work first for this presentation, especially for the very reason that the Asian community facing really this urgent and extreme violence that we're having in this country. But violence against Asian is nothing new for many of us immigrants here in the United States. In 1882, the introduction of the Chinese Exclusion Act, all the way to the 1980s, the Vincent Chen case for this Chinese man on the night before his wedding day and got beaten to death with a baseball bat by two white men. And those kind of situations continue to repeat itself. And women fighting in court, such as Helen Zia fighting for the Vincent Chen case, and also Chanel Miller fighting her own case at the time for the being the victim of the Stanford sexual assault, is also the story that many people still don't know, but is important for us as a cultural institution to tell that story through art. So Chanel Miller, when we invited her, and we invited her to the space, knowing that we're going to have this new platform and to be the amplifier of the Asian American artist. Now, many people know Chanel Miller through the book, but also the book I highly recommend called Know My Name, and Oprah Winfrey introduced the book in her show as well. And many people actually got to know Chanel's writing when she did the impact statement on the court, when she read them aloud. And then later on, she had this book, Know My Name. And then it was also through that process that I learned that Chanel is also a wonderful artist. So the Asian Art Museum invited her to create this large mural in our Wilbur Gallery, which is part of the expansion. And this is the work that you can actually see from the street. and especially at night, because in daytime, the glare of the window make it sometimes difficult to see the work in its entirety. But then at night, this almost like a beacon in the dark. And for people passing that street at night, they will be able to see this work in clarity. And again, when I'm talking about this work, when we curate the work, we did not know there's going to be a pandemic. But then the topic and the theme and the character that she has created was so timely. So at the time in 2020, when we installed this piece, it became a healing for the city. And together with the other two work that I will be introducing, they are really the love letter that we as a museum give to the neighborhood and write to the city write to the city that we have never seen, that was this devastated. There's no cars, no people on the street. All the business were closed. And when you're passing by this work, and it have that healing effect, and kind of like a message to many of us who were suffering from this pandemic, and kind of giving us a sense of hope as well. So that's the work that Chanel has created. And this is her portrait. And if you go inside of the gallery, this is what you will see. And, you know, the museum was closed. And so again, the work was very timely to think about that this is something that people can have a sense of ownership by walking on the street and see this work. So, and if you want to know more about Chanel Miller, and it's very easy to see a lot of her information that you can Google from online. And also that she starting to have, not necessarily a column, but she started to draw for New York Times. And I highly recommend that going to her Instagram to see a lot of drawings that she created, whether in response to the pandemic or in response to the violence against Asian communities. So, so definitely, you know, this is the kind of voices that we would like to amplify and uplift. And again, this is the work that you will see if you visit San Francisco. And then below Chanel Miller on the street level, this is another work, Jennifer Waffer's Pattern Recognition. And this is a very vibrant work. And again, if you go to Civic Center, you go to the neighborhood, we are surrounded by these grayish concrete building that doesn't necessarily offer the neighborhood this sense of vibrancy and colorful sort of encounters. So, so in this, you know, Lawrence and Grady Lui High Street art wall, that's what we call it. This is a mural that is 7 by 30 foot long. And the intent is to host ongoing series of commissioned public artwork. And right now it's viewable, and it has become this place for people to take selfies at, and people hang out in this, in front of this murals. And this is by Jennifer Waffer, a Filipino-American artist. Of Asian descent, a Filipino-American artist who was born in San Francisco. And she made this mural trying to honor 9 historically important American artists of Asian descent who are active in San Francisco Bay Area. And this comic book style speech bubbles pop up from a colorful background, and to shout out names such as Russo Sala, Bernice Bing, and Carlos Villa. And again, each column or behind each name, for example, the one that Jennifer is posing, the Russo Sawa one, you will see the pattern of Russo Sawa's work, but also that Jennifer did a lot of research at the Asian Art Museum and to look into the Southeast Asian collection that the museum had, because those are the collections very often got overshadowed by our East Asia collection. So Jennifer made an effort to look into the Southeast Asian collection and the patterns such as Vietnamese culture, Thailand artifacts, Cambodia. And so she draw from those patterns and created and enlarged them onto this mural. And so for people who are from this Southeast Asian culture or background, when they pass by this wall, they will recognize some of the references. And so it's almost like a secret code to invite people to explore, and seeing something new from the familiar, or seeing or seeing the familiarity from something new is another layer of the work that she has created. And this is, and as I said, that's a 7 by 30 foot long work. And so one of the things about this work is that it's facing the street. So as a mural, as a public art, of course, it will experience such as graffiti or vandalism, but I'm happy to report that since the installation of this work, it has been kept pretty well. There are tags from here and there from time to time, but we have prepared for it, and our museum has done a wonderful job in safekeeping it and maintain this work. So if you come to San Francisco, again, even when the museum is closed, you can pass by and see this lovely work. And this is a view at night. So if you pass by High Street at night, you will see the Chanel Miller work got lit up. And right now it's winter, so the tree doesn't have the leaves. And so you will get to see the work even more clear. But at the time, we were also talking about what does it mean to have this tree, and you cannot see it in its totality. Like there's nothing blocking the view, but it's almost like you're navigating it. You're walking into a forest, and then you see the spirit. And it's a little bit like a peekaboo, and also very explorative, exploratory into the work. And then on our rooftop, the East-West Bank Terrace, this is the work by the artist Sharon Jeeva. And the title is called Don't Mess With Me. And it's viewable from the streets below. Sharon Jeeva is a street artist based in Mumbai who designed this image. And she grew up in the Bay Area. And this is the work that also known as the Pink Lady, which depicts an Indian woman with a raised fist and with this brass knuckle that spell out the word boom. And the Pink Lady first appeared on the street of Mumbai in response to this gang rape, and several men charged in a high profile this gang rape case in Delhi in 2012. So, and for Sharon Jeeva, it's important to talk about why that these three artists were chosen, because they're all from the Bay Area, and then they all have this deep root from the Bay Area. Jennifer was born in San Francisco, and Chanel Miller was born and raised in Palo Alto, and Jess was brought up in Berkeley, and the Mission District mural and the skateboard culture of San Francisco deeply influenced her. So she is a self-taught mural artist, and then so after she moved to Mumbai, she started to make a lot of street art. So this idea of bringing the Pink Lady from the street of Mumbai back to the Bay Area and to put it onto the rooftop is really this idea of that we want to honor this piece, and we want to have the Pink Lady watch over us on the High Street and McAllister Street, and giving people below a sense of safety, a sense of protection, and a message of our stand in fighting against gender violence. So again, this phenomenon that we're experiencing in the country for Asian experiencing the violence and in this pandemic time, in this difficult time, is nothing new. Is similar to the Muslim and the South Asian experiencing after 9/11. So I would say it's woven throughout our curating when we think about engaging with a contemporary artist, the message that they bring, and the agency that we would like to have, and then the canon that we wanted to change. So this is what that first came to the museum during the pandemic when we cannot open. So we have this first street work that we were preparing that rolled out at the same time with the transformation project. But as the pandemic hits, the museum was closed, the street work still stands, but even more relevant than ever. So on that note, it's something that was not necessarily planned. But again, if we follow that core of why we do art and why the museum is still relevant in today's culture and society, and I hope that these artists are the living proof for that. So, to talk about, these highlighting these artists, many of them are not necessarily world famous artists. And for Jennifer Waffer, in her work honoring the 9 Asian American artists, is really to, again, bring out this issue and topic about these artists being, significant in their work, but then have long been ignored and excluded from the mainstream American art history. And so with Waffer, celebrate them with pattern drawn from these artists' practice, and with the museum now honoring these 3 young women artists and celebrate their work is really important. And and emphasizing these artists that not only from the East Asian heritage, but also the Southeast Asian heritage and also South Asian heritage is very important. And again, Asian itself is this kind of constructed idea of these geographical location, but still it's important for us to think about what that means, and also highlight the artists that is very active in that culture and with the region as well. So that's the outside. And now I would like to take you inside. Zheng Chongbin, I Look for the Sky. And Zheng Chongbin is also a Bay Area artist that is also a first-generation immigrant artist that been in the Bay Area for almost 30 years. And this is the museum, Bogart Court. And you can see some of his drawings, but I would like to point to the right side of the slide where that you see previously what this North Court or Bogart Court looked like. And it's kind of like underused public space and a common space within the museum, because the museum has very strict code on how artwork need to be preserved and treated. So they're all in the gallery that has not only the security control, but also the humidity and temperature control. So outside of the gallery for a museum that with a lot of archaeological objects, that area doesn't have doesn't have any, I would say, the artwork in the collection. So when I was, when I was hired and looking at the space and thinking about what contemporary art means for Asian Art Museum, one, to think exteriorly, which are the murals that you just saw, and then also how to think about this interior space and what does that mean. So this underutilized space of Bogart Court needs to be activated. And the person that came to mind is Zheng Chongbin. I mean, in the future, I would love to just introduce, have a presentation just to introduce his, like overall of his work. But today we're just going to touch on very quickly. And so this installation is methodically engineered structure mounted with an array of staggered panels that vary in transparency and pattern. And the layered, let me see if I have, yeah. Okay, so the layered acrylic and optical film sheets will filter and warp and refract the light from the overhead. So when we create this work, we know that it was the time that we're going to have the election. And even abstraction is Zheng Chongbin's kind of creative outlet. The election was very much in his mind. And so he conceptualized this work with the awareness of the election, as well as the museum-wide vision of connecting the outside of the museum to the inside. And this work is also inspired by the architect Gay Olente's original design of the court. And Gay Olente originally said when she was transforming this site, which used to be the San Francisco's main library, was that this library was way too dark and she needed to introduce the light. And she said, let the light comes in. So and I always say that when we do art, this is a relay because it's one generation after another. It's not just by one person or one generation. So as Gay Olente introduced the light into the museum, now it is Zheng Chongbin's turn to sculpt the light. So and for Gay Olente, I think that she introduced the light and hoping probably other artists will come in and do something with the light. And sure enough, Zheng Chongbin applies the light, but also the influence of California light and space movement to this work, and resulting a moving painting that draw from his earlier practice primarily in abstract ink painting. And then the work continued to get extended into the Osher Gallery. So what you feel is connecting to the outside with that structural installation. Then as we go inside of the gallery, it connected to our inner self. And so this idea is making, connecting the outside, but at the same time, it's also about the body. And when we go into the Osher Gallery, its center consists of chamber made from scrim. And inside, it has the distorted video from several projectors and ambient noises. And it's very hard to describe them without, the visual and without the audience experiencing it. So again, I strongly recommend, for those in the Bay Area, come to visit the show. And for those of you couldn't travel yet, I hope that will be an opportunity for you to experience the work. And across from our Osher Gallery and on the same floor, we also had a new gallery rededicated to the contemporary art collection, because previously the museum doesn't have a gallery dedicated to the contemporary art collection, and also the contemporary art collection was only started in the recent 10 years. And then so in the Osher Gallery, we are showing this collection rotation, and the name is, I'm giving it a name called Memento, and featuring two large-scale iconic work from two artists, Jaishree Chakravarty, as well as the Hong Kong-based artist Lan Dongpang, that explore the urban spatial politics through the lens of memory. Again, one is this really the almost like a mapping, a layered mapping of one's in this case, Jaishree Chakravarti, seeing the city of Calcutta, the urbanization of that, and growing up in the suburb of Calcutta, and to see how rapidly that this city changed. And this is a reflection of what she was feeling inside. It's a marvelous piece, and it was a very and it was created at a very important stage of the artist. And then the artist Lan Dongpang, this is the work that was taken the scene from his homeland, Hong Kong, and with the aesthetics that is very reminiscent to his practice as a painter, but it's also an interactive piece where as the viewer coming to see this work, you will see your own shadow also get projected to the screen. And it's an invitation by both artists to allow the audience to walk into their art and to have this kind of bodily encounter of the piece. And this lens of memory and also seeing the rapid change, whether is through urbanization or through political repression, is being illustrated very proactively and poetically and subtly by these two artists. And it's important to know that while these work are created at a critical juncture of the artist's practice, we are also the first museum in North America to have acquired the work by these two artists. So, and I wish, you would know more about the work if you cannot travel. So on our website, you should be able to see the interview and also the video clips of how the artwork can be viewed and what the artists are saying about their work. And for Lan Dongpang, I think the work really depicts this rapidly changing Hong Kong and this landscape that reflects the outside world, but is filtered through his inner world. And the memory of home for both Chakravarti and Lan Dongpang, I think they were trying to really capture this fleeting moment, whether it's through the abstract form or through the landscape, and obscuring these memories and evoking scattered recollection of the disappearing past. So, and as we just opened for a few days, the response has been overwhelming. And I just really wish the artists could be here. We invited both of them to come. And we still hope that they will be able to come this year when it's safer to travel so that they can see their work themselves in this part of the continent. So these two collection, these two work in our collection represents the value and breadth of our developing contemporary art collection. And this is only the beginning of our curatorial vision for this part of the collection. And the vision, I would like to think that it's centered on innovation and creative survival in this rapidly changing world. How am I doing on time, Chip? I'm just trying to be conscious. And then I'll talk about After Hope. After Hope is in our Lee Gallery, and it's a experimental project that I'm hoping to continue as a series. So After Hope consists of 54 short videos that are recommended and sourced around the world. And it's not a typical screening program that the audience will follow a schedule. The total length of the videos, if all of them get played, is nearly 6 hours. So nobody is expected to finish all the work, to finish watching all the works, because as visitors walk into the gallery that is also filled with street posters, the encounter of a work that could take one to the market of Myanmar, a monologue of an unapologetic Asian American woman, or hearing sound of tear gas in Hong Kong. And without a fixed timetable on what's on the screen at the moment, just like the world, we don't know what's going to hit next. And as the audience stands or sit between the video on one side of the room and the wall of the ephemeras on the other, the gallery is intentionally not dimmed to total, not dimmed to total darkness, because not like a total darkness like in a cinema that draws the audience into an environment the video creates, because instead we actually create this room for the audience to be made aware of their own presence when navigating what's in motion and what's being the action and what is being acted upon. So when we say that we were sourcing these posters and informations from the artist, they could be the history that got compiled by the artist, such as the Iranian modern history, or what happened in Myanmar in 1988, August 8, the very important movement and very few people know about, and the street posters that were created and populated in Hong Kong. And during the pandemic, at the very early stage of the pandemic, we already see that this pandemic, how is instigating the racism against Asian in this country. And we were working with Stop Discriminate Asian, this collective, to create posters and bring awareness to a lot of events and encourage people to report a lot of incidents, and the posters are, as a result that they are here. And then we also organized a lot of working groups that are closed section, because many of these artists actually don't know each other. It's 54 short videos, but it's more than 60 artists behind this work. So we organized these closed sections, inviting artists to meet each other and talk about this idea of hope and how everybody else was coping. That was one time when we were inviting this after hope artist from Azerbaijan. And it was literally wartime in Azerbaijan, and he wasn't sure if he was able to get internet, but he managed to join us. And those are some of the situations that are that we're witnessing. But then at the same time, this idea of building solidarity among Asian and Asian diaspora, and also this creative resistance is really important. Is a really important role that the museum can take. So that is about the After Hope. And recently, I was interviewed by Hyperallergic on After Hope, and I talk about the components of After Hope. We know that there's the video on the screen, and then this ephemeral wall. We're also calling it the Hope Wall. And then also we have this afterhope.com, which is the online platform that documents the project, that featured the additional writings and the events that were populated and generated organically by After Hope. Because traditionally, Asian Art Museum is really a museum of archaeology items, historical artifacts, and is not necessarily known as a place for artists. And of course, for the contemporary art department, newly founded in this museum, one of the first step I'm thinking is how that we can welcome and invite artists, but also provide this platform to amplify their voices. So after hope.com is created for that reason, not necessarily as a museum announcement type of placeholder, but really a site of engagement, a new kind of site for engagement. Is my co-curator is Pema de Melen, who is the professor at Cal Poly Art and Architecture Department. So he has been facilitating a lot of these dialogues, and it's very important for us to think about this kind of a partnership when we're working with a traditional museum, that the process of putting program and exhibition together has a very embedded system. So the museum's way to launch a lot of exhibitions and program need to follow some very strict guidelines. And so working with the co-curator and the co-curator also having this kind of platform that can address a lot of these needs and facilitation with flexibility is important, but also a crucial strategy when we're thinking about the new approaches to innovate museums process. And it was through this, it was through the installation of all of this work, I started to get an idea on what it means to treat and artwork in a traditional museum. And I have to say, I have gained so much more admiration on how the museum conserved the object from the moment it was identified to the time that it was presented and on display. And to me, that is an art form on its own. But the question when I was interviewed by Hyperallergic is to think about, as a museum, when we have dedicated so much resources to this care of object and this piece, this slice of civilization, then for the contemporary art, how do we transfer this museum's sense of care for object to the care of human being and to the issue that human beings are dealing with? And that is a question I ask myself, that as a curator, as a contemporary curator inside of Asian Art Museum, how could we address that issue? Because that's the issue I've been thinking as I curate. And the dimension that we could offer, the new dimension that we could offer to the museum and rethink what the museum for is really important. So I want to talk about, after hope, with this idea of, what is the hope that we can go after? And I think that this is the joint attempt, not just, between the museum and independent curator, and also these artists from all over the world. But this is also this idea of develop new curatorial research practices and cultivate this active engagement within the structure of the museum, and what kind of methodology that is needed in order to imagine new ways of presenting and mediating contemporary art and cultural production. So this idea that having the object from the ancient past or the recent ones, made by these contemporary artists, I think they very often, when they're presented in this tangible form, they could easily be embraced by the art historical canon and exhibited. And then this morning, I was even talking to this critic in Asia, and baffled by this idea that why that they are so easily embraced. And then he used the word like, yeah, that's kind of like wholesale. But the question I have also is, what about the activism and the embodied research that are deeply connected to the artist's practice and process? They are not able to influence or modify institutional mode of working or policies. And can we change that? So by experimenting with a project like After Hope, while that we're mobilizing so many different kind of factors in the field and probably beyond, I hope that that could be a way to address not just in the era of pandemic, but also this kind of political upheaval everywhere that we're seeing. So those are the kind of questions I have in mind, and I know today we have art historian, we have artists, and community organizers and institutional executives, right? So to think about this not just as a new mode of creating, but I think at the time when Asian American community is scapegoated for the pandemic, as our seniors are brutally attacked, and our families and friends in Asia are under extreme suppression, all of these points to the systematic violence, whether it's led by white supremacy or by a totalitarian regime. We don't have a place to facilitate these kind of conversations that are nuanced, that are empathetic, and also that is actually safe. So I'm hoping with these kind of projects that we need to think about, and I don't have any script with me. We need to think about that institutions cannot be institutions of statement generating. We can't just roll out that statement and say that, okay, we denounce this and that, but how is being done through the work. And again, all of these are questions. They're not answers. And so I think, by talking about my thinking process, the curatorial process, along with the artwork that are on view, both from the street, how that we're turning the museum inside out, introducing Chanel Miller, Jennifer Waffer, Sharon Jeeva, to the inside, Jaishree Chakravarty, Lan Dongpeng, Zheng Chongbin, as well as the After Hope artists. These really, I would like to think that it's the first of its kind in Asian Art Museum. And it's launched by a young department, we're still at our infancy state. And there's a Chinese word, like when you don't know enough, you don't know what the fear is. So I kind of think that we launched all of this artwork without really understanding the museum system too well. And we just did it. And I have to give a shout out to all my colleagues in the museum, as well as the director, Jaishree, that they have this belief without even knowing, the detail of what we're going to put up. And when we invited Chanel Miller, we did not know what she's going to create. And when we were asking these artists and collectives and telling them, after Hope, many of them, at the time did not know what kind of artwork they're going to share with us. And there were even work that made specifically for After Hope. So I hope that collectively, both from my colleagues in other departments, because it's really not about the contemporary art department. It's installation, it's museum services, it's registration, conservation, public program, marketing, development. All of them have to be mobilized, and I hope that this will not only demonstrates. I think we'll figure out a way to sustain it. That this collective commitment to uplift the voices from the ground and to give platform of resistance and to build solidarity and creativity of thought and action. So I don't have, I wish I have something like more punchy or something, but it's really more about practicing it, doing it, and figuring out. And these are the kind of work that I think can lead us to the path. And when I now looking back to see all these work that I just mentioned, I have to see, I continue to see all the flaws in them, the things I didn't do well, and those things keep on coming to my mind. But I at the same time, I just want to share with you this process of how these work come into the being, and so I went off a little off track as I was thinking about After Hope, because it was also thinking, in my head. And these are some of the installation shots. And then meanwhile, we try to facilitate these public programs, and on YouTube, you will be able to see these three wonderful artists talking about how they create their work. And then we're still finishing our terrace. We'll start installing next month. That's Pinari Sampita's Breast Stupa, and then also Ai Weiwei's Fountain of Light, and Ala Abakar Luminous Ground. And then I do want to very quickly talk about the recent acquisitions, because again, when the museum is in its mission to also build a collection for contemporary art, what kind of artwork do we want to collect? So I hope these will show a kind of a direction that we're going after. This is the self-portrait of the photographer Michael Jang, and he's famous for his Asian American series in the 70s. But then at the same time, I also came across this particular work that is a self-portrait that he took for himself in 1973 in San Francisco. And then Barry McGee in 2019 spray painted "Are You Okay?" Are we okay? And this is the work that is in the recent acquisition of the Asian Art Museum, as well as A Lady and the Road Map by Bernice Bing. And we acquired a total of 8 artwork from Bernice Bing, significant and important American artist of her time that is still not being recognized, and it's important that the museum take a position and honor her work. So that's Bernice Bing. And this is another piece that is now in the Asian Art Museum's collection. And with that, I will conclude today's presentation. And I hope it gives you a glimpse of what we've been doing in the past 2 years. And time flies, and we just reopened. I hope you get opportunity to visit the museum. And if not, which is totally understandable given the current environment we're in, we have a really wonderful online presence as well. So check us out. And sometimes this is another problem to have, that when you have too many videos of the talk, how do you navigate through them? We don't know yet. So, but check us out.
Great.
So I just want to say hi also to Christine, Alpesh, lots of familiar names. Thank you, Masha. Yes.
Well, hopefully they'll still stay here, because I want to ask you a bunch of questions, and I would love to receive some questions from everybody here. Just to share with everyone, the way that we do this for the Q&A is you'll see a camera that's right next to your name, to the right of your name. Just click on to that, or is the camera? That's correct. And then you will be able to get into a queue for me to bring you up on screen to ask a question, or you can just use the chat and I will repeat that question. And then I'm hoping that Abby will answer it. So Chip, if you can bring us both on screen. Oh my gosh, Abby, that was fantastic. So much of a range of work. And the things that you said were so profound. I can understand now why Alpesh is so fond of you, and how grateful we are to Alpesh for having you with us today. I want to just ask while we're waiting for some questions. One of the reasons why I was really excited for you to be here is that Chautauqua, now we're year round, especially the Chautauqua Visual Arts is year round, especially with this lecture series, and also we're expanding our residency program, et cetera, and renting out faculties, studios, et cetera. Anyway, but in the summer, the main Chautauqua season is for 9 weeks. And the first week, which is June 26th to July 3rd, is in the topic of that week is China and the world, collaboration, competition, or confrontation, really examining, the relationship between the United States and China and other countries' relationships with China. And so I wanted to ask you something that we had spoken about on the phone a little bit. Can you tell me too, what do you think about, many aspects of the art world and the artist in China, also their struggles? Every artist has some set of struggles, or also the wonderful blooming of contemporary art in Beijing and throughout Asia. Can you talk about those things, and what are you seeing just in general of the art world there, and also the relationship in the arts between the United States and China generally in the visual arts?
Oh God, these are
there
huge,
you go.
huge,
those are huge questions.
These are huge questions, but about Chinese contemporary art, I think art and freedom of speech always go hand in hand. And we're definitely seeing the environment is tightening up, and it's getting more and more difficult for our artists to feel free to create work. And not just that, I mean, free from what, right? Free from the ideological control, the silencing of journalism, and also, but at the same time, free from capitalism. I mean, one of the things about the Chinese contemporary art that has been getting so much attention, the capital has a lot to deal with it. So there's the art, and there's the art market, and I have to say, a lot of times, the kind of art that, we hope to see are not necessarily what the market is in favor of. And also what the market is in favor of are, a lot of times, I don't even know if I should call them art anymore. And so that's one thing. But then also, the kind of work that is coming, out of, say, Beijing, and, I think it's very, very complicated. In the 80s, what we're seeing is really the country started to opening up and the end of Cultural Revolution, and people got that sense of freedom. And that sense of freedom created some of the most phenomenal contemporary art out of China.
Wow.
But then as 1989 came, and, when the government started to get tanks to kill people, to kill its civilians, it's not the immediate effect, but gradually you see the killing of the art and how, people were responding to it. And, it's a slow process, but we're really seeing, the environment has been suffocating. And also that is from this very, I would say, mainland centric sort of idea on what Chinese contemporary art is, and what about those on the periphery, right? If you are not in these major cities, how will your artwork know? And a little bit like our East Coast and West Coast thing. I mean, West Coast artists, I always feel like they're so under-recognized. And so are the artists of color, the minority colors in this country. And so and this is why it's important for us to look at the artists from Taiwan, from Hong Kong, and also, that is not part of that mainland Greater China narrative. So I think, so that is one layer of the many, many facets of that question. And then, because, what we're all seeing, how, the sunflower movement in Taiwan that was taking place, as well as the umbrella movement and the recent 2 years, the devastating development in Hong Kong. And I'm seeing great artworks are being created out of these two regions. And so in After Hope, we're able to feature the work from the Taiwan artists or artists based in Taiwan, as well as the artists who are active in Hong Kong, as well as the diaspora community that has a home base in these places.
So great.
Does that answer any part?
Oh my gosh, amazing. We're really excited about that week, and it'll be very interesting to see what comes out of it, because I think one of the aspects of Chautauqua is thought leadership and exchange, and to talk about also art obviously is not only symbolic, but it's the practice of freedom of speech. So yeah, I think a lot of people in this country take that for granted, especially artists. And speaking of which, so Dr. Patel, Alpesh Patel, who is the author of Productive Failure, which is right here next to me, behind me, he's asked a question. He says, I've always found fascinating how you, Abby, work with artists. Can you talk a bit about your approach to working with contemporary artists? And I would just want to add on to that, how do you find them? There's a lot of artists. How do you choose them? How do you work with them?
I don't have any kind of like one size fits all approach, but I'll just take, for example, Christine. I always like her work. I just, we just never had the chance to work together. And so when she was working on her project for, Place of Belonging, I'm naturally curious about what that project is about. And so, so when we talked about it, and then she said that, I would like to, get in touch with the community. And then I immediately thought about the refugee, from China, the political refugee from China. And then so I invited, Christine to East Bay, where many of them live. And so they came. Lots of times for lots of new immigrants, because of the language barrier, they are often not included in the cultural activities that we have in this country. So it's very difficult for them to kind of be part of this larger, what's so-called, art activity or public life, what have you. They're trying to survive, and they're trying just to make ends meet. So we're very lucky that we got hold of them, and they're able to come out and to participate in the workshop. And it was through those facilitation, I got to learn Christine's practice more. And that's very similar, like how I work with other artists, is to working with them in the process when they create the work. So a lot of times when I work with the artist, I'm not working with the end product of what they have created. Most likely, I or the institution I'm with are very much of that creative process. Not to intervene, but to support, because I feel like that is the best way to first get to know the artist, but then also have a very vested interest in what they are going to create. So I think those kind of approach also allow we got to know each other. I mean, just like you, Sharon, in order to do this talk, we have a lot of kind of conversations beforehand just to get to know each other. Even that, it will be me doing a presentation, but it was through those kind of very detailed process and putting things together, you started to get an idea on how we figure each other out, how we figure out to make this project happen. And working online, making it a lot more difficult, I have to say. You can still do it, but art is something very hands-on. It's about embedding the practice itself. So I think that approach is very important to me. That's how I develop relationship with artists, and also work with artists and I think first and foremost, I'm an audience. And as an audience, I need to really understand them. And then that I will learn to figure out, okay, what is the way to present the work? And I still, I struggle with that because a lot of times what the artist is about is so much more than the final thing or the work in progress that we're seeing. There's so much more than that. So I think, and then how do you, as an institution, present the work more than just the outcome is very, very challenging. So I'm still trying to figure that out. I always admire other curators, how that they would do so much better, or they figure that out. They look so much more sophisticated, and then I'm not being modest. It's true that I try to figure out how other people do their work.
I would just say from the things that we were saying about the contemporary role of the museum, it seems like you're leading the way. So I think you're an amazing example. And in fact, Christine says Abby's role was instrumental to the success of the process, ! She supported the project with CCCSF staff help from outreach, access to this community, trust in community building, coordination, language interpretation, advice, and consulting. So thank you for all that great work. That's extraordinary. And thanks for sharing that. I have another question.
You, Christine.
Well, yeah, thank you, Christine. That's amazing. I'm happy you're here. Another question from Judy Berry, who is our Chautauqua Visual Arts Gallery's director. And she asked, how do you see contemporary artists' work change /shift from artwork they've created in China versus the work they make while residing in other countries, even in the United States? So you were talking about oppression, really. And so in China and a limitation of freedom of speech, how do you think that changes their work? I would imagine a lot could probably change.
It certainly made things a lot more difficult in China. But then on the other hand, we're really seeing some amazing work come out of China that is not part of the market system, that is not part of the institutional system. And they just, they took it to these kind of raw streets, without institutional support and like a guerrilla kind of movement. And they work with underground NGOs, they work with volunteer groups, they work with community who got evicted. And then you really see some, while that is this really terrible suppression happening, but then at the same time, you are amazed how the ability to imagine, new creative outlet, it's quite, it's fascinating to watch how that they could compete with the control. So some of those I have been very impressed by and continue to follow. And clearly they are creating new territories and, cultivating new places, and getting into these areas that they could escape the sort of like surveillance or what have you. So that's one part of it. But then the other part is about how the artwork will shift once that you becoming an immigrant. Because I think there's a difference between sojourning and residing. Because when you're sojourning, you probably have this idea that you're going to go back soon, and is a hideout. You're just you're trying to just be in a probably safer place or whatever the reason that could be. But when you're really starting to living here, and take myself as an example, it wasn't until I came to United States, I started to look at myself and re-examine myself through this very different lens, like being an alien, what it means to be an immigrant, what it means to be a woman immigrant in this country. And it was that lens prompted me to shift to art. And I wasn't even an artist or doing anything in arts before. But then because this experience, I made that shift. And so if you are an artist, you can imagine those kind of identity crisis or just questions on identity, and what, the familiar and the estrangement, how that will make you, and how that you're trying to make connections as an alien to your homeland, but then as also an alien to this current new place that that is harboring you. So, and that change will not happen immediately. A lot of times it's becoming like, it's a process of becoming like after 10 years or 20 years, you started to see the shift. So it doesn't happen immediately. And so it's good to always get to know about their practice before and their practice later. So for example, Zheng Chongbin is a very good example that he was a portraiture painter at the beginning. And then he become abstract. And if you see his early work, it's very masculine and very aggressive. But then later on, after almost 20 years, it's almost like that ego was gone, and the artist become absent. And what you see is the influence of the nature of his search for his own existence in this part of the world, and also how the life in California has transformed him. So you see that in his practice, you see that in his artwork.
So great. Thank you for that. You know, it's interesting when you mentioned your life before art, and I just looked on your LinkedIn page actually, and something that stuck out to me was in 1998 to 2002, you were an analyst at Silicon Valley Bank, and then
Yes.
after that, you were a co-founder of the Chinese Art Network. So how did that happen in between that? Like, what, I know you said you found art, but somebody just doesn't whip up and find and create a nonprofit organization. So I just
You
wondered,
do.
it's
You
hard to do.
do.
Oh, it's
Because
hard
you
to do
got
that
no.
though. Hard to do that. But tell me how that happened for you during those times, because that's quite a contrast of different worlds.
Because I didn't have a choice. Because there was no institution facilitating a contemporary art photography or image making for Chinese immigrants that are not doing traditional art. So there's no such place, there's no such organization. So you have to create something on your own
That's so
because you
great.
have no choice.
So great.
You have to develop that space. So it's not like, yeah, so I remember at the time, you know, we're all like immigrant photographers, and then we try to do, you know, we try to just show the work or anything. And a lot of people say, we never heard of such group. And even I remember I went to my old organization, Chinese Culture Center, and we don't fit into what they did then. We're not traditional enough. Our thing doesn't necessarily have any meaning. And looking back, you know, even nowadays, now that I'm in institution, I might not know how to treat that work either. It just, so you have to create something on your own, and then you try to survive. And but then I just got very, very lucky that people were very willing to help me. So they're willing to give me opportunities. And then at this time, I think many of us that in the field probably were feeling that there was something that we're missing, and we all need something. And then we're just kind of at the same time joined together. There are people in the museum world or in the cultural field that were looking for these kind of expressions. And we've kind of fit into that, and because we created it. So, and I think that also, you know, go back to Alpash, like how the process working with contemporary artists is a lot of times I see something and I feel like those are the kind of work that we have not seen before, or we have seen before, but it was in a different context, and we probably don't have it for our community or the kind of cultural background that we have. And so that part is important. And this also brings up another point, is the kind of work with women artists. And a lot of times I have to emphasize that these artwork got presented or highlighted, not because they're women, but because the work is important and the work is missing from the big picture. And so we saw this work and they're important, and they fill a void. And so I always view it that way, instead of like that it's about, just about gender or something, but it's not. And even, like right now in Asian Art Museum, all the work that I just mentioned, this kind of practice, this kind of platform, we don't have it in the country. And these are the kind of voices that I'm just attracted to. And when you realize that it doesn't get facilitated, that could be discouraging, but then that should also become a motivating factor, that you shouldn't. And then I remember one of the reporters when we were talking about, Chanel Miller and Jennifer and Jess, there was one comment made, and it's just like, well, these artists are not that famous, and when they're not famous, the artwork is hard to circulate. Even if I write, even if we write about it, and the article is not that easy to circulate. But that shouldn't be the reason we don't do them. That
Exactly.
should be, that should be the reason that we do more, and
Correct.
more people need to do it.
Correct.
So those are just very kind of, I would say it's driven, a lot of them is driven by instinct. And I would say we have so many artists doing important work, but their work, for whatever the reason, are not being seen widely. And even like this, and I don't know why I immediately thought about this, but I have to kind of comment on it, is, in this current moment when Asian communities are experiencing this really extreme, hostile environment, of course, when we look at Asian Art Museum, we would like to know what the Asian Art Museum has been doing. And if you see these kind of artwork, it's not that it just happened. It happened such a long time ago, and it repeats. And then so a lot of these work address to this, but it's probably not in a causality type of manner, but it's connected. And I think that we need to do this work, but we need to respond to the moment, but at the same time, we can't just respond to the moment. And therefore, these artists that they have lined up, and they need more museum to step up to recognize them. And they don't need to be the Asian Art Museum to recognize them. Right.
And I think your starting that organization is a great example for so many artists too. If it's not being done, and an institution isn't finding them, or isn't, well, that doesn't really happen, but isn't recognizing them at the moment, you start something, for which you did. Now, Christine has a couple of questions. So the first one is just wondering if you have thoughts about building cross-racial solidarity in this moment. And then the second question I'll repeat after the answer of the first.
I think her two questions are related. Okay. And I would like to, because her second question is, she can imagine how to even begin to curate art and artists from such a huge region as Asia. And not to mention artists in the Asian diaspora, in Latin America, Africa, and Caribbean, where to begin and where to end. I get overwhelmed by the idea of that question too. And, of course, nobody have answers for that, but I think that these should be the question that constantly on our mind as cultural workers, because, and I would like to quote this one activist from Hong Kong who was also a writer and a philosopher, very young, and at the time that he said, for Hong Kong people to connect to the world, we connect through pain. And I think that will be where to begin. And then I kind of feel like that's, in so many ways, that's how Christine's work struck the chord with me. The sense of belonging is, is also kind of talking about the sense that you don't belong. And that's where you kind of start, because that there are so many places that make you feel that you don't belong. So you need to think about, okay, so where do I really belong to? And that sense of belonging. And that come from the idea of pain. And then I remember also talking about this idea, because after hope, right? You're trying to talk about hope in the current day and and especially talking to people who are in Myanmar, in Philippines, and in Hong Kong, and I remember the artist Lun Dongpang at one of the closed sections mentioned that hope comes from being hopeless.
Yeah.
And so that was,
Right.
yeah, I would say that's where we begin. We begin with sharing our pain, and the museum as a space, I think should be a place that should have this ability to talk about pain, where I think a lot of museums don't. And so we need to think about that, and then hopefully we don't need to feel so hopeless, and we, from what the artist has created, we try to find a sense of hope. I don't know. Christine, you ask very difficult questions.
Well, thank you, Christine. We have another question from Julia Kwan. Julia is one of our alumni from 2020 from the School of Art residency program. She's a fantastic artist and really wonderful person. She writes here in the chat, "Hi, Abby. Thank you for discussing the importance of doing the work to better serve communities. I know that, quote, community engagement, unquote, and, quote, dialogue, unquote, are often championed by many artists and art institutions. I was wondering how you decide, quote, engagement successful, and in what areas do you find room for improvement?" And she put in parentheses, "You alluded to certain projects that you continue to think about afterwards during your talk."
Yes. And I think the tricky word is what is being successful. And I think as institutions, we got so many measurements in place, KPI,
Yes.
ROI, those kind of terms.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, a lot of, institutions and foundations are starting to realize that, they could be one of the measures. They cannot be the only measure.
Mm-hmm.
I honestly don't know what constitutes a successful community engagement. I think it first start from the positioning of such engagement,
Mm-hmm.
and what is the intent of this kind of engagement. If this engagement is about numbers,
Mm-hmm.
is this the engagement about evaluating diversity?
Mm-hmm.
And what you do need to measure them, but on the other hand, also trying to measure the unmeasurable is kind of counterproductive at the same time.
Mm-hmm.
And so I don't have a great answer for that, but I will always start with what the intention is, what the intention of that community engagement. Does that mean, for example, sometimes we have this internal discussion, on social media and on the events, right? What kind of events that is constitute, what kind of events will be considered as successful? We have a lot of people, of course, that's great, but does that mean that having a lot of people then it's a great success? Then if that is the goal, then you have to create the kind of program or events that has this mass appeal. Then when you have that as the intent, very often it changes the nature of what you try to engage. And that's a lot of times I feel it that way. And the same thing with the social media. If you want to have a lot of people to like it, if you want to have a lot of people to retweet it or something, and I would say a piece of artwork can never compete, or not never, maybe sometimes, but most likely cannot compete with a panda being very cute or a celebrity gossip or something. Then we really need to see what is behind those numbers. And I get pressure for that too. And it's not that I don't care for those numbers, but a lot of times I become very suspicious of how we measure them and the outcome for that. So I'm not sure if I answered Julia's question, but I think the ability to engage is actually not easy. For example, when Christine was doing her workshop, this idea of just having the access to engage. We kind of did it in a expedite way because I'm sort of the middle person. But that's also because I know Christine's work back in the days. So there is this already built-in trust with that kind of community engagement. But I will be very careful if it's a completely new artist and is not from the Bay Area before, and what their intentions are, because the rules of engagement is also important. So the community engagement started with the rules of engagement and the intention of the engagement that need to be constantly facilitated and negotiated. For me, the success lies in that part way more than what the outcome is.
Yeah, I was going like this because the larger numbers, I mean, sometimes that to me to be very shallow, because in a sense that kind of success, quote unquote, means that they're reaching a larger audience, but maybe not necessarily reaching them, that maybe the intimacy is the answer. But I love your answer to that. And Julia says, thank you so much for sharing all of your concerns and the complexities of putting together any project. I can't agree more.
Yeah, well, I think engagement is actually very, very hard. And very often, I think cultural institutions, and this is a tricky part because, again, cultural institute, and we have this internal discussion as well. Cultural institutions are not necessarily good at that. Mm-hmm. And the so-called community engagement, and we need new imagination for that, because very often the so-called community engagement is put on the side and it's being considered as part of the public program or a eventful thing. But I think, community engagement is very, very long term, and it's not one event. Mm-hmm. And of course, you can start with events, and then you do a lot of events. But to make them eventful, we just need to be very careful about those kind of things. And I just think that a lot of times community engagement is more event-based, but I don't think it's only event-based, and I think it's actually very, very hard to do. So, yeah.
Well, anybody, I'm going to wait for a last question, and I'll ask you a question while I'm waiting from the audience for any further questions. I've done a couple book tours across the country, and I'll never forget going to Spaces, which is a nonprofit organization in Cleveland. And we had a big town hall forum there. And someone in the audience, when I asked, we always warmed up with a panel. In the audience, I would ask, what do artists need and want? And someone stood up and said, I don't want to go to a museum. I want the museum to come to me. Now, I think that's a huge issue. And I do think that museums have stayed way too exclusive for way too long. And now they're caught in this place where they have to get out there. You're talking about engagement, these kind of public programs that are looked upon as, well, you have to go to the museum for that. Now, you're doing things that are very different. And kudos to your colleagues and also to the museum for creating that department and bringing you on to make those changes. But what are you all doing to go out into the communities?
Very hard.
Well, I think that has to be fierce, don't you think? I mean, Something has to happen there.
I mean, I wish is a lot easier. And I think, the current moment, we're forcing museum to think otherwise. But instead of the museum going to the audience per se, I think, thanks to the kind of time we're in, and I always say this is, the past 5 years has been very bad.
Yes.
Simply. But I also have to say that it also forces institutions to really take another look at themselves. Mm-hmm. And I also feel like the artists of color, their work have never been this visible. Mm-hmm. And of course that's not enough, and we need to keep the momentum. And I think institutions really need to respond to this whole climate and question, its own sort of practice, mm-hmm. how they do things, the diversity of the staff, the diversity of the artists that they present, and their relationship with the public life. Mm-hmm. Why do museums exist? Right. Why are we relevant? Mm-hmm. And how are we connected to public life?
Correct.
And I think it's very difficult bringing the museum to people. If we're saying that, just through the internet and even just say, just thinking completely outside of the box, I bring you that object into your home. But what else am I bringing to you? Am I bringing you a very colonial teaching, a misogyny kind of attitude? All kinds of these kind of things are embedded in so many practices, within the institution. And if that doesn't get taken care of, and it's better that they stay where they are, and not to even further spreading the harm. But I'm being a little mean, but
no, you're not.
That's that's just and the question about why we're relevant, why we should be there, and then mm-hmm. And then how you not only engage, say the mass, the local, different neighborhood and whatever the community, whether that there's a very specific kind of constituency that you have in mind. At the same time, the donor community, find new donors that are willing to support this kind of work is very important, I think, to think about how that we can make museum more accessible. But, again, making museum more accessible is one thing, but what kind of the ideas that we want to make it right. more accessible.
Right.
So,
right. Yeah. Digging deeper. Well, thank you for digging deep with us this evening. I mean, how amazing. I cannot thank you enough. You're truly inspiration and thought leader for all of us and moving things forward. I'm thrilled that Chautauqua Visual Arts and the Asia Art Museum will be collaborating, and I look forward to that.
Me
and
too.
Then I just have to say thank you again to Alpesh Patel for connecting us and for all the work he does, as we were talking about, with thinking about art history differently. And I'm really, really thrilled to read your essay in his new book that will be coming out. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you.
And for Chip, I would love for Chip to bring up who the next person's coming. I wonder if you know Hung-Yi. She is Hung-Yi Lee Krakauer. She's actually the executive director of the Queen's Council for the Arts. And she is also a children's book author. And she works with a lot of immigrants in Queens, New York. And she's going to really talk about that. So I think that is going to be a really interesting conversation. She works with all different different forms of the arts, not just the visual arts. So she'll be with us next week, and I'm so thrilled that you were here with us as a part of this lecture series. I can't thank you enough, and I can't thank everyone too for being part of our open porch. I always say that. It's terrible. Our porch. Do we have that? The virtual porch. You know what? We're all virtual now. It's like, I wish we were open, actually. That's what's in my mind. Like, I wish we were open, that we can all exchange with one another. Hopefully by the time that this comes out in a recording, we will be able to hug one another.